Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my podcast. Today's podcast on leadership is about being willing to show up, stand up, and speak up. I remember watching a demonstration in my community on a particular subject, and I watched people get up to the mic who were talking about some pretty outlandish ideas that had nothing to do with what the demonstration was about. And it was a fascinating study in human nature because there were about 700 people standing there, all of them applauding people making comments that were against races, that were against other community members simply for being different. And this was completely not what the group came there to demonstrate about. And what shocked me was that I didn't see people walk away. I didn't see any voices of dissension. I saw everybody stand there and applaud. And that's very concerning because if you're showing up for something in particular and that's not the way the group is going, somebody has to stand up and say, hey, this is not what we're here to do. It's very concerning when you see large groups of people get together and things move in a nasty direction, in a direction that isn't about a particular cause, but becomes about hatred. That I found very disturbing because I would hope that if I felt a cause was important and I showed up for it and there were people there with other agendas, that I would speak up to say that's not what we're here for, and that I would move away from that group or organization and either join one or create one that's cohesive to the idea at hand. We have to be very careful if we find ourselves in situations where things are being steered in a direction that's not the point of that event, that we don't just go along in order to get along. That's why it's so important to show up, stand up, and ultimately to speak up, to make sure your voice is heard. I believe we're all here for a purpose. I believe that our souls came here with a job to do, and that we have viewpoints, we have backgrounds, experiences that can serve others. But we can't do that if we're just going along with the crowd. We can't do that if we're standing in the background listening and not offering anything to the plan, not offering anything to that cause or that intent. If we want change in the world, I know it sounds cliche, but we have to be part of the change. We can't quietly sit there in the background and do nothing. I remember when I was living in Northern Ontario, the government came to town and they wanted to put a radioactive waste site in our community. So I joined the government's liaison group. I wanted to know what this was about. I wanted the background. I wanted the information as to what specifically were they going to do. And they gave us a lot of information saying that this was low-level radioactive waste and it really wasn't going to be harmful to our community, and we were going to get so many benefits and so much money coming into the community if we would take this waste. So I started to dig and discovered there was a whole lot of information we weren't being given. And when I brought that up, when I was the voice of dissension saying, hold on a sec, the historical documents say this stuff is a lot more dangerous than you're saying. We have a lot of, young pregnant women and babies in this community that would need protection. And we weren't getting solid answers. That's when I left, formed my own group, Citizens for a Waste-Free Community, and ultimately defeated the government putting the waste in our community, because waste like that ideally should be contained at source, not moved all across the country. And ironically, the communities where the waste was actually wanted the job of maintaining the waste themselves at a safe facility. So it's hard, it's scary sometimes being the only person to stand up and go, okay, I know this would bring a lot of money to the community, but we're not getting straight answers. This is wrong. This is, we're not being told the whole truth here. Sometimes it will be sitting at the table with other people you work with or live with, and ideas are being brought forward that you don't agree with. If you always go along with things, nothing ever changes. You know, Gandhi said, whatever you do, no matter how insignificant it might seem, it's very important that you do it. There's a lot of things in this world that have gone awry because of good people saying nothing. So it might not be a political thing for you. It might just be stuff going on at work or at home that you don't agree with, or you think there could be an improvement on. It's really important that you show up, stand up, and speak up. You may have some wonderful creative ideas that the world can't possibly know about because you judge them before you even put them out there. That's another part of being that visible. Yes, people might not like what you have to say. I had some pretty uncomfortable experiences when I stood up in a community where most people were going, let's take the money, let's take this radioactive waste, and they just didn't want to hear the truth about it. That was a very difficult position to be in at the time. It was a really challenging situation, and I ended up getting involved with other organizations that were about maintaining the well-being of the planet, and they came on board, they supported me, and TV Ontario. Like, it's amazing who will jump on board to support you when you're doing something in alignment with your path. And that's the important thing. Are you checking in with yourself? Are you getting a message internally that says, hey, you're supposed to get involved here. You're supposed to say something. How often do you bite your tongue when you know you're supposed to get involved? You're supposed to put something out there that maybe nobody else is saying. And isn't that the most challenging thing about leadership? It's leading. It's being that lone wolf, being that person who gets up and expresses perhaps an unpopular point of view, or maybe something nobody else has thought of. That's something else we often do. We defeat ourselves. Oh, well, somebody will have already come up with this idea. There's no sense my saying anything. You don't know that. I remember many years ago, it was an interesting experience. I was in kind of a twilight sleep. And again, this probably has something to do with my skill set as a psychic. I had this idea come to me that there would be this thing created called a palsy belt that by emitting electronic signals would help people with cerebral palsy control their movements. I sat on that for a year, but it wouldn't leave me alone. And then I saw something on the news about athletes having electronic therapy to help repair tissues and help them move their limbs properly again after an injury. And I thought, that seems possibly linked. I'm going to do something about this. So I fired a letter off to the Easter Seal Society saying, I had this sort of kind of dream. And they wrote me back and said, thank you very much. We get that kind of stuff from people all the time. We bring it to our research department. We appreciate that. There's a lot of things in the world that have been created through dreams and visions. Elias Howe was working on creating a sewing machine. He couldn't figure out how to properly thread the needle. That night he had a dream that he was surrounded by savages who were coming at him with spears, and the spears had a hole in the tip. The movement of the spears and where the hole was in the spear gave him the idea for the sewing machines we still use today. You have intuition, you have wisdom inside of you, but it dies inside of you if you don't activate it, if you don't put it out there in the world. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody doesn't like your idea? Somebody gets mad at you? Maybe somebody does give you a hard time, and maybe things become challenging because you spoke up. But again, if we don't speak up, our world doesn't have the chance to become what it could be. It can't reach its full potential. Our society can't reach its full potential unless good people speak up. So if you have something to say, set aside the part of you that negates it. Oh, nobody's going to listen to that. Oh, that's a stupid idea. Oh, don't be so silly. Oh, somebody else will come up with it. Speak up. You never know what other people are thinking. I remember taking an economics class in university, and I was coming in as a mature student, so everybody was a lot younger than I was. And the teacher started talking calculus derivatives, and I'm sitting there feeling absolutely stupid because I've never taken calculus, and I'm hearing basically a foreign language. I have no idea what's going on. So finally I summon up the nerve, and I'm thinking, well, everybody else has this because I'm the old one in the room and they've all had calculus. So I walk up to the professor at the end of class and say, I don't understand this. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. If you haven't taken calculus, you don't need that part of it. I'm just giving that to the students who have. And behind me is this collective sigh of relief from about half a dozen younger students who were present when I brought that forward. You never know. I remember I was going through a relationship challenge, and I was hearing a speaker at an event talk about ways to deal with that. And I summoned up the courage to talk about my situation, and the speaker was very blunt and to the point, which was exactly what I needed to hear, but I ended up in tears, standing in a mic room full of other people staring at me. It was uncomfortable. But after the session ended, I had a whole bunch of people come up to me and say, oh, thank you so much. I had the same question. So be the brave one in the room. You never know who else you're speaking for. So when you show up, stand up, and speak up, there's usually other people you're representing, even if they're not in the room at the time, even if you don't know it. You can't possibly be the only person in the world with that standpoint. So by your communicating what's inside of you, really what you're doing is you're giving birth to ideas, to perspectives that other people in the world are going to connect with, but they can't if you don't put it out there in the first place. So let your light shine. Let your voice be heard. It will find its audience. And even if that's an audience of one other person, you've made somebody in the world feel less alone. I'm also a performance poet, and I remember being at an event, and I was reading some pretty heavy-duty poetry. I went through a lot of hard stuff when I was younger, and a lot of it was expressing that. And it felt very vulnerable to stand on stage and basically bare my soul to everybody in the audience. And I noticed a young couple watching me, and I watched this young lady reflexively grab the hand of her partner, who held her hand through the entire recital. And at the end, they came up to me and she said to me, thank you. I don't feel so alone now. So I want you to remember that when you're afraid to participate, when you're afraid to bring your ideas forward, when you're afraid to be that voice of dissension, and you stay quiet, you're also not speaking for all the people who feel the same as you do and are also lacking courage. Be the brave heart. Speak up. Be heard. If challenges are presented by your doing so because you spoke up, others will rally to support you. And if they don't, you seek out the tribe who will, because there are other people like you, and you deserve to be heard. So part of you bringing your inner leader forward is to listen to that voice inside of you that says, now is the time to speak up and be heard. Be willing to do so. your voice might just cause a shift in the experience everybody else is having. Your voice may be part of ushering in a new paradigm for those who are listening. Even if at the time they are resistant, you've planted a seed, and that's important. Be willing to show up, be willing to speak up, stand up for what you believe in, put it out there, and see how your world changes. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you again next week.